Okay, Bob Bromberg is on. Bob is on. Yeah,
oh, he's in a car?
Well, he's not here. He flew up for a simcha.
His arms must be tired. You can see the sky in the background.
So, and then at least one or two other people that sometimes get on.
Okay.
Wait
so
one more minute.
Why?
Why? Because
20 after on Friday.
Yeah.
We have a printed schedule. All right, I'll do some preliminary stuff.
That's always good.
Okay, so Rav Dimi quoted Rav Yochanan, who quoted Rav Elazar ben Yaakov on various diverse topics. If I recall correctly, one of them was, it was his opinion, you can't marry your stepsister because people will talk, but the rabbi said, nah, everybody knows she's not really your sister. Another was that if you collect a lot of stuff of shikva and the like, and you make a pile out of it, you have to take meiser, and then that was qualified by if you live out in the country and you have a field, so people might think you grew it and didn't take meiser. But if you live in Manhattan, everybody knows that you did not grow this in your backyard. And another thing he said actually earlier, and now it's repeated, that, and we're at now at Omer Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, and we're now on our daf. Meis Taifes Arba Amas, that a dead body literally grabs the Dalet Amas around it. This is, we know min HaTorah that if you touch, move like it's in a wagon, and even though you're not touching, or go over a dead body, you're tamei min HaTorah. So the rabbis were concerned that if you're proximate to a dead body and inadvertently make a no-hel, say by reaching out, that you'd be tamei. So but you wouldn't know it because you didn't realize, you reached out. So they made a takana that a 7-foot barrier, Dalet Amos barrier, 7 or 8 feet, is also creates tuma. It would be tuma mitzvah because it's a gezerah, lest you actually do it. So that's what we're talking about here. Okay. What? Tomorrow, today's daf, Mem Dalet, Amid Aleph. Okay. Vatana Tuna, and quoting a Mishnah in Ohalos, Chotzer, okay, now I have to explain something else. Their normal cemeteries did not have a flat piece of land and they put kever up after kever in neat rows. Their normal cemeteries, they dug down and they made like a tunnel or a cavern, and they cut sideways into the walls of that tunnel, and that's where they put the bodies. Now, there were 2 ways of going down to make the tunnel. Sometimes they dug vertically. So now there's like an L-shaped digging. Other times they made a ramp or a staircase until they got deep enough, and then they made the horizontal tunnel. In Metzius, that means the fact of the matter was that where it was vertical, people would just drop in the hole. So they did not need a sort of a big antechamber. And the antechamber was, say, the size of, we're all old enough to remember a telephone booth. Okay? If they made a sloping or a staircase, or dug it into the side of a cave, inside of a hill, then the antechamber would be significantly larger, and it would be 4 by 4 amos. Okay, the halacha will be different in terms of how far from the kvarim you are to become tameh, based on those two methodologies of creating the underground cavern that they buried it. Okay, Tanatunar, the Mishnah in Eilai says, Chatzer hakever, this little antechamber to the grave, to the burial tomb, ha'aymed b'tocho tahar, a person who is standing in the antechamber before he goes into the tunnel itself is tahar, even though, if you imagine the antechamber is a square and then comes, so it's like like a T shape, and there's a grave in the vertical part of the T shape, but if you were to measure laterally from the guy in the antechamber, maybe it's only 3 amos to the body. But nonetheless, because it's a distinct thing, and because it's impossible for him to reach through the dirt, right? He is not considered tameh. This is an exception to that takana. Okay? That's an exception to the Tana Kama. Okay, Divrei Beis Shammai, according to Beis Shammai. Rabbi Hillel Aimrim Arba Tvachim. I swear, okay. The Tanatun, I said that. Chatzer kever ha'amed b'tzach tahar. V'hu shahu ba arba amos. If the thing is arba amos, this is where I didn't skip. Divrei Rabbi Shammai. That's the wording of Rav Shammai. So he says, presumably, a smaller antechamber would still be subject to the gezerah. Beis Hillel Aimrim Arba Tvachim, no, it can be a tiny little 16 inch antechamber, barely room for one guy. Now, again, going back to my illustration, it has to be fairly narrow because you have to be able to brace yourself on the walls while you're trying to get back up because there are no stairs. Okay, maybe there are those rungs like in a manhole.
Right.
Okay, b'medvarim amurim. What does Rabbi Beis Hillel mean by saying only 4 by 4 tvachim? Shepischa me alma, where the way you go in and out is vertically. This is to drop in the manhole example and then scamper back up as best you can. Avo, pischa min hatzad. But if the opening is from the side, if it's a ramp or a staircase, okay, divrei hakol arba amos. Everybody agrees you need a significantly larger antechamber, dalet amos, at least 7 by 7 or thereabouts. So remember, we have to tie this into the notion of reaching out. Okay, that's the fundamental issue that underlies the machlokes. So the Gemara says, klape laya. Literally, it means in what way are we pointing? But in this case, it means which opinion makes more sense. Okay, and we haven't heard the opinions yet. Okay, Adarabba, you have to look at it. It should be the exact opposite. Min hatzad midrid v'nothik. If it has a ramp or a staircase, so you would turn your back to the kvarim and you'd walk up the stairs. There'd be little or no likelihood of your reaching out into the tunnel and putting your hand within dalet amos of a kever. However, What? Okay. What? I Mother Venothic. Okay, you would go out completely. Minamila, if you have to climb up vertically through the hole, you're going to grab onto whatever you can to brace yourself to be able to lift yourself up. So you might well grab on to the beyond the little porta, the little antechamber. Because it's going up like this, but there's the big cavern going out this way. So you may reach into the big cavern to brace yourself. Okay, and your hand will now be within Dalet Amos of the kever, and it won't have the vertical wall of the tube between you and the dead body. Okay, so Efshir Delo Ma'ayil. It's almost impossible to scamper up through the hole without grabbing onto things and inadvertently creating an ohel with one of the dead bodies. So the Gemara basically says that's true. And Ella b'madvar mamurim, so they revised the brisa. What are we talking about? Shepischa min hatzad, when the opening is from the side, you need only the tiny antechamber. Ella pischa min hamayla, but if you have to climb out vertically as best you can, arba amos. He agrees with Beis Shammai that it's arba amos. So it's an example of that logic dictated that the brisa had an error and they corrected it. Hanimili chatzer v'kever. Here, what we're talking about is a crypt or a catacombs, where that's what we're talking about. The Messiah mechitzasa, because the earth itself that's not dug out forms partitions, so you know exactly this is where a body is. The texture of the surface is different, and this is the wall supporting the hole, the tunnel. Okay, aval meis ba'alma. But if we're talking about what we think of as a normal burial, where it's a few feet deep from the surface of the land, then there is a very good chance that you went to Schwartz's Levaya and you're walking out of the cemetery, and you know to walk between the graves, but you might inadvertently come within 7 feet of one of the graves, so the takana is applicable in that case. And the dead body does acquire or seize the land around it to a total of 4 almost 7 feet in each direction. Going back now to the Mishnah, and we're going to be discussing now for a while the list of restrictions. There were people that the Kohen announces, and then the officers, the Shoitrim, pass on the word by, being positioned through the crowd and repeating it so everybody can hear. And we had the list: the house builder, the vineyard planter, the newly married fellow. We had a list. Now, we're not talking about this scaredy cats. We're only talking about the specific exemptions. And there is an issue with that because there are 2 psukim. There's one pasuk that says that the Kohen announces if you built the house and you didn't live in it yet, you can go home. There's another pasuk that says if you built a house and you live in it, you don't even have to go into the army. Okay, and we'll get into all of that now. But the background here is we're going back and forth, and we're going to try and find psukim that prove up all of the exemptions, okay? So the pasuk says, Miha isha sher eras isha. Who is the man? He's announcing whoever's the man who got married recently and only had erisin, but that did not yet get to have nisuyin, didn't bed her yet. He can go home. Whoever planted vine, blah, blah, blah. Tana Rabbanan. So the rabbis say, Asher Eras, okay, who did Erusin. Now, it doesn't matter what the status of the girl is. Erusin is exactly the same text. You see the same bracha for someone who is a girl who's never been married before, or an almana or a garusha. Okay, the only difference is the amount of money mentioned in the ksuba. Everything else is the same. Echad ma'ares es ha-besula, v'echad ha-ma'ares es ha-almana. So it uses the word almana, widow here, but it also means a divorcee. Okay? V'echad shomeres yavam. Similarly, if a man died and he has surviving male siblings, one of them marries her. Now, there is a link between them. We learned this. It's called a zika, and it's similar but not the same as an erusa. She can't go marry someone else, just an erusa can't. She can't go sleep with someone else, an erusa can't. So it has similarities to an erusa, and if he is her yavam, he's allowed to go home too. Now, there's an interesting thing. What if there are a whole bunch of brothers? They're on the front lines. They're about to go try to beat up the Plishtim. But 4 guys all have a zika to one Yavama. Okay, so the Gemara explains here, even if there are 5 brothers who may sechad mehem, and one of them, what?
Right, go ahead.
There are 5 brothers who may sechad mehem. One of them gets killed in the battle or dies in some other manner, the milchama, because of the war. Kulan chayzvin. They do not have to fight it out on the battlefield to see which one's going to get the girl. They go home and they fight it out there. Okay? Now, next phrase in the pasuk, there's a phrase in the pasuk, lo lokach, he did not take. Okay? And there's no mapike, he just says he did not take. So Gemara says, lokacha. It really should say he did not take. So now we're that maybe we should learn that pasuk to mean prat lamana the Kohen Gadol. Maybe what we're excluding is a lav marriage. To remind you, a lav marriage is a marriage you're not allowed to engage in, but it counts anyway, and she would need a get, etc. And we're going to learn a very interesting diuk over here. Prat l'almana l'Kohen Gadol, a widow to a Kohen Gadol, or a grush or chalutza l'Kohen Hedyot, or a divorcee or chalutza to an ordinary Kohen, or a mamzeres v'nesina l'Yisrael, a girl who cannot marry into a regular Jewish man because of yichus issues, or a bas Yisrael l'mamzer or l'nosin, or it's the opposite case where instead of the man being the Jewish guy, it's the girl who's the Jewish guy and the man is the mamzer or the nasin. Okay, so maybe that's what we're excluding. So if that's what we're excluding, it means that the marriage itself, the ceremony, the erusin ceremony, is what sets up the sin. So if the Kohen Gadol may not make erusin with an almana. That's the implication here. So Lema Deloka Rebbe Yossi Glili. This is opposite to the view of Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, who explained when it tells us that cowards can go home, Hayire Varach Haleva, someone who is scared or is faint-hearted, Ze HaMisyore Me Averos Shebiyadai. Those people, what they're really afraid of is they have sins that they have not yet repented, and God is going to see to it that they get killed off in this war. That's their punishment. So they don't really, they're terrified because they did something wrong. They never brought their chatas, then Yom Kippur didn't show up, and now they're going out into battle, and they're afraid that they're going to get their just reward. Okay, so, and therefore our Mishnah, so Rabbi Yossi Galili tells us, that would say that this guy should go home. But the Mishnah said he does not. So it's not Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. Mistama. This is all a Havamina. Afila Tamer Rabbi Yossi HaGalili. No, we could say that the Mishnah, that the guy who has a lav marriage does not go home, would agree with Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, the Rabbah, the way Rabbah interprets another, a related issue. The Amar Rava, li'aylam eina chayiv ad sheyivo. If you, marriage is only a hechsher mitzvah. The act of doing the erison and even the nisuyin, that is a heter to be with her. But you haven't done anything wrong yet, even if you're a Kohen Gadol with an almana, this is Rava, until you actually sleep with her. So these guys are not, don't yet have a sin. Okay, the Omer Rava, li'aylam eina chayiv. They don't have to bring a chatas, meaning they're not yet liable, ad yivo, until they actually have intercourse. My tam lo yikach. So why did the pasuk use the lashon lo yikach without a mapik hey? Mishum lo yichalel. It wants to create a grammatical parallel to another phrase in the pasuk: "You shall not profane yourself." The Kohen, by sleeping with the woman he's not allowed to be married to, he profanes himself, and it's what? Yeah, but it's okay. And therefore, lo yikach is written the way it is to be parallel to lo yichalel, that he is not profane. Mishum hachi einu like. Therefore, he would not get malchus until sheyivo, until he actually sleeps with her. Okay, because take here is in its narrow literal sense of take her, we would say take her to bed.
So theoretically, if he stayed married to her for 30 years and they never slept together.
Or lived in the same house, because yichud would apply. But yes, he could be married to her. Conversely, if it is a lav marriage and they do live together, he would be chayav achatis every single time that they're intimate. What? No, it's still a lav. No, but this one does. If you want to play, you have to pay. Okay. So we're going back now, and we're still dealing with the list and the implications of the list.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes, but ask two.
According to our school, Rabbah there should be read Rabbah.
Okay.
What concept that be?
Because they're two different people from two different generations. Okay, and often the Gemara, will say so and so said something, but he wasn't born for another 100 years. So one of the commentators said, he points out he wasn't born yet, change it to Rava, who was already born, or conversely. Okay, next. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis teach, Asher bona, Asher nota, Asher eras. Each of these he builds, he plants, or he does erusin. Lamemra, Torah derech. What?
You have the memra, I have limda.
Okay. Derech eretz. Derech eretz means proper behavior. So the Gemara is telling us that the sequence of the words, in other words, God could have said, if you get married, if you plant a vineyard, if you build a house, or any one of, 9 possible permutations of which goes first, which goes last, which is in the middle. But God put it in this order for a specific reason, to teach us derech eretz, the way you should do things. Sheyivna adam bayis, a man should find. I'm going to translate these loosely. A man should provide himself with somewhere to live. V'yita kerem, he should provide himself with an income. Literally means plant a vineyard, but you could plant wheat too. Okay. And after that, if he's set up economically and he's set up where to live, that's when he should finally look for a wife. Okay, Shlomo says the same thing in Proverbs. Mishlei, that's Proverbs. Now, this is very hard to translate, so I'll do it, but it doesn't mean what it sounds like. Do your work outside is the literal translation. The atda sod besodaloch, and prepare your field, which is not the same thing as do your work outside. That's why this is all very hard to translate. And after that, build your house. And again, it doesn't mean physically build a house. So now we're going to do a drasha. That means build your house. Okay? The atda b'soidelach, prepare your field, zekerem. So in other words, we're interpreting Shlomo's words to be exact same thing as we just said. First, build a house, then provide yourself with a source of income. That means get married. Okay? So Shlomo also said, first set yourself up and then get yourself a wife. Davar acher, we're going to do now a bunch of reinterpretations of Shlomo or drushes on Shlomo. Davar acher, another drush on Shlomo. Heichen b'chutz milachtecha ze mikra. Prepare your work outside, study Chumash, Navi, and Ksuvim, learn Tanakh. And when you know Tanakh cold, va'adita b'soidelach ze Mishnah. That's learn Mishnayos. V'acher yivone b'secha ze Gemara. And the third phrase after, you know Chumash, so you know all the psuk, and then you learn Mishnah, so you have a general outline of what's going on. Then and only then should you learn Gemara. Davar acher, another possible interpretation. Hachen b'chutz lemachtecha Ze mikra u mishnah. That means that's the preparatory phase of your learning Chumash and learning Mishnah. Okay? And then the Atida Besaidelach, Ze Gemara, that's learning Gemara. The Achar Uvonisa Beisecha Elu Maisitayv. After you know all the rules, then you should do Maisim Tayv. Okay, so the Gemara here is suggesting that it's not just doing a good deed, doesn't mean walking the little old lady across the street in your Boy Scout uniform. It means weighing you because this person needs food, this person needs food. You have to know the halachas of who has kedima before you can correctly perform good deeds. Rabbi Lazar Beno Shel Rabbi Yossi HaGalili Aimer, he reinterprets it a little bit differently. Hachen b'chutz l'machtecha, ze mikra mishnah u'gemara. That means you go to yeshiva and you learn as much as you can. You learn Chumash, you learn Mishnah, and you learn Gemara. And here really Gemara means halacha. Okay? And the Adida Besaidelach Elu Masim Taivim. That's Masim Taivim. And now that since you know Chumash Kol, you know Mishnayos Kol, you know all the halachas, you're acting properly in your interpersonal relationships, the achar ubonisa beisecha darosh v'kibel schar. That means that you should share your learning with others. You should explain, somebody answer shilas, give a shir in Gemara, and for this you'll receive a heavenly reward, because elsewhere it says you're not allowed to be paid for teaching Torah. Eilish, and now we're going on in the list, and we had in the list, if you build a house, you're allowed to, they tell you to go home, but if you only made an addition to the house, or just put up a little gatehouse, which is just a little box that a guy could stand in out of the rain, but it's not large enough to put a cot. Okay? Somebody who builds a gatehouse or an akpandri, whatever the list of a porch, a gazebo, etc. Okay, so we have with that's Reb Yehuda's ruling. Tana, we have a brisa, which contradicts that. Im haisif bo demus echot. If you simply make the house 3 inches taller, you add a single roll of bricks, that would be enough to make the house defined as new. And chayzer, he goes home. So that's just, but we hold by the Mishnah, we don't hold by the Brisa, but in fair disclosure, they give you the Brisa. Now, going back to the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Aimer, af habayne bayis leveinim b'sharon lo hoya choyzer. Sharon, apparently in the area known as Sharon, the clay was not high quality. So when they formulated bricks from that clay, they would start deteriorating within a very brief period of time. And you wound up, if you had Sharon bricks, you wound up rebuilding your house every 3.5 years. Twice, it says twice in 7 years. Okay, so this is telling us that a temporary structure, if you set up a pup tent for you and your kala, you could go home for the kala, but not for the tent. But if you make a tent, T-E-N-T, that would not qualify as a new house. You got to go to war, Fievel. You're not getting out of it. Okay, Tana, we have a brisa. Mipnei shemachad shin oiso pamim shvua. You can't, with the bricks, that you would have to rebuild the house twice in 7 years. Now, the Mishnah keeps going. Remember, I said there were 2 sets of psukim. The first set of psukim we've dealt with where you do get drafted, you do go through basic training, you do go to the border, and the Kohen and the officers tell you if you're on the list of exemptees, you can go home. But now we have a new list who are exempt. They are 4F. They're exempt from being drafted. V'elu she'ein zozin b'mkoimon. They don't even leave their houses or leave where they are. They're completely exempt. They don't even have to go through the draft board. Okay, Bana bayis chadash v'hanacha. He built the house and he actually did move in, but it's Shana Rishona. It's the first year. Okay, or and that whole list. If you planted a vineyard but it didn't finish the Orla period, if you married a girl and it's Shana Rishona, you're totally exempt. Tana Rabbanan Isha, a new question. There is a pasuk that has the word Isha in it twice. The first time it says Isha Chadasha, a new wife. And the second time it says rejoice with your wife. Okay? So I could have said, if you marry a new wife, you get a period of time, Shana Rishona, to rejoice with her. I did not have to repeat the word wife. So the Gemara asks now, Tana Rabbanan, Isha Chadasha, again a Havamina, Ein li ela Isha Chadasha. That would have to mean a girl who is newly a wife, meaning she had been a virgin and is now a wife for the first time. That's a Havamina. Almana v'gerusha menayin. So that would exclude second marriages. How do we know that a second marriage, he also goes home? Talmud lomar isha. It adds the word isha at the end where it didn't have to in that pasuk, okay? Mikol makom, that means whatever wife is new to you, you get to go home. Imkain matam lomer isha chadasha. If it doesn't have to be her first marriage, why is she called a newlywed? Okay, she's a retread. She's not a newlywed. Okay, mi chadasha lo. But no matter how many previous relationships she had, she's new to this guy. Okay, yotza. So this wording would exempt, or really not exempt, would not allow a man who divorced his wife and remarried her to go home, because number one, he's not going to really rejoice. He booted her out once, but basically she's not a new wife to him. She's a second round wife to him. V'yein chadasha lo, she's not new to him. Now we're going to talk about if you did marry her and you did nisuyin and you moved into your apartment and it's only 5 months, right? So he doesn't even get drafted at all. Tana Rabbanan, lo yetze b'tzava, he does not join the army. Literally does not go out with the army. Yachol b'tzavahu de lo yatsa. So maybe we could interpret this to mean he doesn't actually join the fighting troops. Okay? Avo yispik mayim mazon v'yitaken hadrachim. but maybe he can have a non-combat role and do logistics or road repair or sharpen the swords. I mean, there are a whole host of activities that are supporting the troops. When Moshe sent out and fought Amalek, they divided the men into three groups, three equal-sized groups, one with a fighting force, one with the logistics people, and one learned Torah. And all three were necessary for success. Okay, so Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "Yo lo yaver alav kol davar." The army cannot impose any obligations on him. It's interesting, in most kollalim or yeshivas, Shana Rishona, the men do not go back to night seder. My daughter-in-law kicked her husband out right after Sheva Brachas. All right, I'm not sure what that means. Okay, so now, Yachol Shani Marbe. So maybe I can be marbe. I can include other things in this list, such as, logically, if you live in the house for 5 months and you can't even be drafted, why don't we let the guy who hasn't moved in to begin with and hasn't been at all? Why don't we exempt him? Well, maybe we should exempt him also. Not a Karen below Chilulu, or he planted a vineyard and hasn't yet harvested grapes that can be drunk. Okay. Or Isha below Lakocha, or he got married to a girl through an Arison, but he never completed the service, so he can't sleep with her yet. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk uses the word olav, upon him. That's a miyud. That only the people listed in that pasuk, the guy who's less than a year married, less than a year in the house, those are the people that you cannot draft at all. But the earlier list, you can draft them, they just can't fight. Now, this is interesting. Since the pasuk says, you may not draft and he may not go, what if he wants to volunteer? Okay, look, it's the 10th month. You know, I had my fun. Now I want to fill my civic duty. So the Gemara says, Lo yatsa b'tzava, he cannot join. What do we need the words? Since it says he can't be drafted, why do we need the words he can't go into the army? It seems superfluous, right? Lomali, what do I need that for? Lo over alav b'shnei lavin. To teach you that if he actually joined the army, when he's not supposed to, he violated 2 lavin and he gets twice malchus. So it's a very serious thing when the Torah tells you, you are supposed to do something, you do it without question. And when the Torah says you're not supposed to do something, you don't do it. You don't take on, well, I know better than God. What?
He's not allowed to do any of the sport work.
No, he's not allowed to do anything.
Not allowed to go to work.
Correct. Not allowed to do anything. Not allowed to do anything. Okay? New Mishnah. We were talking earlier with a series of Mishnayos about circumstances where the Hebrew language must be used, right? The Yaspu HaShaitrim L'Devar Al Ha'am, the officers speak out and say to the people, okay, that anyone who is afraid or faint of heart. So actually, we're not up to the Hebrew yet. We're going to have a machlokas here as to what that means. Does it simply mean you're cowardice? Or does it mean, as Rabbi Yossi Aglili would say, because you have Averas you haven't fixed up yet? In other words, you could interpret that various ways. Rabbi Akiva Aimer, Hayare Varach Halayvav, that you're afraid or you're faint-hearted, Bishmo. It means what it says. You're cowardly or you're afraid. Okay? She'ena yachla amav b'kishrei milchama oleiros cherev shalufa. He's unable to face, to stand in the platoon and face the weaponry of the enemy. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Hayore v'rach halevav, zehu misyare min ha'aveiros shebiyado. He's afraid because he has aveiros that he hasn't atoned for. He hasn't brought his korbanos, and he's afraid he'll be killed as punishment for those aveiros.
In both cases, you feel fearful. It's only why you feel fearful.
Well, we'll see. Okay, but one is just generalized fear. Another is fear of this circumstance. If they let me go home and burn my chatas, I'll come back. So it's a specific rationale for the fear. Okay, lefika. So what we want to say over here is, and because of these two views and something similar to what you just said, the Torah considers it like a klal uprat. There is fear, that's a klal, but there could be specific reasons for your fear, that's a prat. Tosalo haTorah al kol elu. The Torah hooks all the specific reasons onto the generality of fear. V'yachzer v'glalon, and therefore, either way, the guy gets to go home. Okay, now, Rabbi Yossi, not to be confused with Rabbi Yossi Haglili, he says, Rabbi Yossi Aimer, Amana la Kohen Gadol, if the Kohen Gadol enters an Erusin relationship with a widow, or Gerusha Chalutza la Kohen Hedyot, or a regular Kohen divorcee, or or Mamzeres Unisino Yisrael, a person whose yichus doesn't permit her to enter a regular marriage, the Yisrael nevertheless bonds to her with Erusin. A Bas Yisrael, a Mamzer L'Nasin, or she has the unblemished yichus and the man has the blemished yichus. Harehu hayore v'rach haleva. According to him, all of these guys can go home because they are fearful based on this circumstance. So what is, okay, and then we'll just wrap up here. And then when the officers finish speaking to the people, they establish sergeants or second lieutenants at the front of the line to lead them into battle. And they also have designated officers guarding the rear lines. Okay, so what's going on? The guys in the front, the designated officers in the front, would help lift up a guy who got knocked down by the enemy, but he's not dead. The acherim and the guys who were at the back of the line, miachareim, what were they doing there?
From running away.
Kishvilin al barzel b'yadehem, they held iron axes. V'chol Hamavakesh lachsor, and anybody who tried to sneak out. Harishus biyado lekef lekapeyach es shokov. They were allowed to chop off their legs. What? Well, listen, in the U.S. Army, they shot deserters. This is really possibly lenient. Okay. Now, we're going to go through some psukim and try to understand why the order seems unusual, okay? Shetechilas nikta onisa nefila. So if you translate that correctly or accurately, it means the beginning of running is falling, which is hard to comprehend, right? Shenemar, but we're going to quote a pasuk. Gas Yisrael lifnei Plishtim, the Jews ran away from the Plishtim. V'gam magefa gedola hasuba'am, and as a result, there was utter that destruction. The people were wiped out either by the Plishtim or by illness or both. Okay? V'halanu omer, and yet another pasuk says, V'yanusu anshe Yisrael mipnei Plishtim, v'yiflu chololum, that the Israelis fled from the Plishtim and they fell dead. They fell as a result of sword work. Okay, b'medvarim amurim. When do we? Oh, now that pasuk. Okay, now we're going back to the business of exemptions. In the Torah speak, there are two kinds of wars. The normal way of labeling them is a melchamas mitzvah. For instance, Yehoshua was commanded by God, kill all the Canaanites and take over the land. So that's performing a mitzvah. That's a melchamas mitzvah. Then there's a melchamas reshus. That's when David HaMelech wanted to have a bigger kingdom. Now, they could have lived perfectly comfortably without expanding the kingdom, but they went to war to expand the kingdom. That's a milchamas reshus. So now we're going to talk about, with the list of exemptions, the first group, the second group, which, if either of these kinds of wars, do they apply to? And we're going to get a textual issue, which the Gemara will clean up very quickly, okay? When are we talking about when we say there are individuals that get either sent home or don't get drafted at all? This applies when it's a voluntary war, okay? Avo, bilmalchamos mitzvah, but when it comes to an obligatory war, Hakol yotzin, everybody is obligated to go. Afilu chasen mechadro, even the chasen from his new apartment, the kala mechupasa, and the bride from her chuppah. Now there are various understandings of this. The most conservative understanding is the chassan has to go to war, and since he's not there, the kala is not in her chuppah. A little bit less right-wing answer, the husband goes into the fighting troops, and the girl becomes a nurse or she does logistics, but everybody gets involved. And the most out there view, the Rambam among others, that if it's a Melchamas mitzvah, even the women take up arms. So the interpretation of this, you pays your money, it takes your choice. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda uses different lashon. B'medvar and memurim, what is he say? What are we talking about? Bil Melchamas mitzvah, that the exemptions occur in the Milchamas mitzvah. So he apparently is arguing with the Tanakama. Aval bil Milchamas chova, but with an obligatory war. Now we never saw that word before. Hakol yoitzin, everybody goes. Afilu chasen mechadorai bakala mechu pasu. Okay, so is it late? What time is it?
It's about 20. Why don't you just go to the end of the period?
Okay. I don't know. I lost my. I'm okay again. All right. So, my Ika ben Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yossi Glili. What is the difference between Rabbi Yossi, who said it's fear of being punished for sin, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili, who seems to have said the same thing? What's the distinguish between them? Ika benaihu, these are the differences between them. Aveira de Rabban. If you commit a rabbinic Aveira, for which you would not normally get Malkus, but you, okay? So, Kaman Azla Hadatanya. So now we're going to learn a new brisa and try to see which of the two, Rabbi Yossi Galili, this brisa accords with. Sach ben tefila letefila. What? There are two Rabbi Yossis in the Mishnah. One is Rabbi Yossi Haglili.
Two kinds of wars or three kinds of
wars? No, we're not up to that yet.
Just what was said.
All right, with regard to what we just said, we're not up to it yet in the Gemara, but I'll give you the answer. They're saying the exact same thing. They're using different words. Rabbi Yehuda thinks, yes. Who? What?
Different kinds of wars too.
Two kinds of wars, which are the normative lashon is Melchamas mitzvah and Melchamas rishus. Rabbi Yehuda agrees. He just uses different labels. He calls a Melchamas mitzvah a Melchamas chova, an obligatory war, and he calls the other kind of war a Melchamas mitzvah because the king has a right to declare war, and then it's a mitzvah for you to be in the army because you have to listen to the king. But they're not disagreeing. The Gemara will say that presumably tomorrow morning because I'm not going to get it. Okay. So Man Azlaha Desanya. So who wrote the following? We're going back to the very beginning of our Mishnah, where we talked about Rabbi Akiva says a scaredy cat's a scaredy cat. And the Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Yossi both say the fear is derived from fear of being punished for an unresolved sin. Okay? So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between the two Rabbi Yossis. Before we actually answer that, they're going to say, well, which one fits the following brisa better? Okay, Man Azlaha Desanya, which one fits the following brisa? Sach ben tefila letefila. You speak after putting on your shel yad and before you put on your shel rosh. Okay, areira hu biyado, that's a sin. V'chozer eleha me'orche hamilchama, and such a person gets to go home. When they announce, if you're afraid, he's afraid. He didn't tell God, please forgive me for, you don't bring a chatas, but this is an aveira de rabbana, and yet he goes home. Come on, so who would say that? Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Not Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Mantana laha de tana rabbanan. What about the next brisa? Shma kol koronos vehirtia. He hears the enemy's trumpets and horns blowing, and he starts trembling. Hagafas the tirsin vehirtia, or he hears the shields banging. Maybe it would be the tracks of the tanks, and he trembles. Tzachsua harvais v'mayim shaisnin lo al hareg. What? Okay. Or he sees the flashing of the swords, or he pees in his pants. That's how frightened he is at the war. Okay, Shosin lo al birkov, he urinates on his knees. Okay, come on. So who is this accord with? So this is straight out fear, right? Lema Rebbe Akiva Delo Rebbe Yossi Galili. So maybe this is according to Rebbe Akiva, who says just fear. Okay? So, but no, the Gemara says what we're really talking about here is Afila Rebbe Yossi Haglili Maida. Rebbe Yossi Haglili acknowledges that if you exhibit genuine terror, he doesn't have to link it to an Avera. You get to go home. Okay, Mishum Diksiv, because the Pasuk says, Lo Yamas Es Halev, do not let their hearts melt. Achiv, of his brethren, the Levavo, be like his heart. In other words, Rabbi Yossi agrees that fear is contagious. And to get rid of the guys who are going to bring down the morale is a major gain for the army. So they send the stam cowards home because they're better off not being there and contaminating the morale of the troops.
When they said walking leads to downfall. The people leaving, walking and deserting.
Fleeing is going to lead to the fall.
Okay. V'hoya kechalais hashoitrim, and after the officers finish speaking, Hai mipnei shetechilas nisa kapila nefila. Okay, so this is your pasuk. The beginning of running is a downfall. Okay, mipnei shetchila nefila. It should really say running away is the beginning of the downfall, not the downfall is the beginning of running away. So okay, switch it around, say that running away is the beginning of the downfall. Okay, b'medvarim amurim, what are we talking? Now we're getting to the two, Reb Yehuda and the Tanakama, on the interpretation of the word Milchemes Mitzvah. Okay? B'madvarim amurim bil Milchemes Harashus. Who said, when do we say it's a Milchemes Rashus? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rashus the Rabbanon zu he mitzvah the Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda's use of the term Milchemes Rishus is the same as the Tanakama's use of the word Milchemes Mitzvah. Mitzvah the Rabbanan zu he Chova the Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda just substitutes the word Chova where the rabbis use the word mitzvah. Okay, Amar Rava, Milchamas Yeshua Lakavash, the war that Yehoshua engaged in to capture Canaan, okay, Divrei Hakol Chayva. Everybody agrees that was obligatory, whether you call it Chayva or mitzvah, doesn't matter. Milchamas based David L'Ravacha, the wars that David engaged in to expand his kingdom, Divrei HaKol Rishus. That is a war that is optional, voluntary on the part of the leadership. So, Ki Pligi, what do they argue about? What they argue about is preemptive war. In one of the wars that Israel engaged in, they sent aircraft to destroy the Egyptian Air Force before the war ever actually started. That was a preemptory strike, okay? And that's what we're talking about here. Keep plige.
Blockading the Straits of Iran and the Gulf of Aqaba legally considered an act of war. Then they said the point.
Well, that what the Israelis did is an act of war too. Because that's okay. Preemptive war means you strike first. Obviously, you have a rationale. I'm not going to argue that. I withdraw the example. Okay, I withdraw the example. Okay, keep pligi. When do they have a dispute? L'ma'ute of de kochavim delo leisei alai. When they attack the non-Jews first to reduce their numbers and reduce their feeling they could succeed, and therefore the war doesn't happen. Okay, that's their example, and I will not use an Israeli example. Okay, Mar Korile Mitzvah, Rav Yehuda says preemptive war. If you have to put it into one of the two categories, because those are the only two categories that exist, it's considered a mitzvah. It's considered a mitzvah to enter preemptively to give your side a better chance to win. That, if you have to put it in one of the categories, that Reb Yehuda says is a milchamas mitzvah. Umar kari rishus. But the majority of the rabbis, Erwin, call that a milchamas rishus, a voluntary action. That doesn't mean that there's no reason for it, but it does mean that you could have not done it and the work could have maybe happened or maybe not happened. Either way. Nafkamina, what would be the difference? So this is interesting. If it's a milchamas mitzvah, then you're osek mitzvah pater min a mitzvah. So at least theoretically, if you're in the middle of battle, you're the Israeli soldiers taking the Sinai Peninsula, and morning comes, you don't have to put on tefillin. You don't have to daven, because osek mitzvah pater min a mitzvah. But if this preemptive war or this preemptive strike, the pilot would, I know it's silly, but the pilot would have to land his plane, put on his tefillin and daven shachris, and then take off again and bomb the Egyptians. Okay, that would be the difference. Okay, nafkamina, la'isek b'mitzvah pater min ha-mitzvah. That if it's defined as a milchamas mitzvah, then that trumps other mitzvahs that can't be fit in. And if it's a milchamas rishus, then there is no excuse. You have to interrupt the milchamas rishus to do mitzvahs. Okay, and we'll stop there. What? What? No, the word mitzvah means obligation.
I'm not sure that Artsko's translation of preemptive is really the best.
Well, what to kill the other guy? He didn't. That was mine. That wasn't his.
No, Artsko uses the word.
Okay. Well, that's what it is. You're weakening the enemy before the war starts. That's preemptive.
All right, Bob. Have a good time. Take care.
Thank you very much. Have a good Shabbos. Be well.
Good Shabbos.